My name is Alina Mercer. I'm 33 years old. And the moment I realized I wasn't invited to my cousin's wedding, I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was standing in line at a grocery store holding a basket of discounted produce when my phone buzzed with a family group chat notification. Everyone was talking about seating arrangements, floral choices, dress fittings, hotel blocks. My name wasn't mentioned once. At first, I assumed it was an oversight. That happens in big families like ours. Things move fast. People forget. I scrolled up, reread messages from the past few days, then weeks. Nothing. That's when the familiar sensation settled in. Quiet, heavy, unmistakable. I'd been excluded. My cousin Anna had always been the golden child of our extended family. 3 years older than me, effortlessly adored, praised for doing the bare minimum while the rest of us scrambled for scraps of approval. When we were kids, she got new clothes every season. I got hand-me-downs. When she turned 16, my aunt and uncle surprised her with a brand new Honda Civic wrapped in a bow. I worked double shifts at Target to buy my used Toyota Corolla with a dented bumper and a radio. That only worked if you punched the dashboard just right. So when Anna announced her engagement after dating Brandon for 8 months, no one questioned the speed or the extravagance. The family treated it like destiny unfolding on schedule. The budget alone was obscene, $80,000 for a single day. My Aunt Rebecca and Uncle David were glowing with pride as they described the venue, a historic country club in Westchester County, crystal chandeliers, Hudson River views, imported linens. Anna had already chosen her dress from Kleinfeld, the kind of place people mention just to impress. And Brandon? Finance job, BMW, polished smile. The aunts swooned. Such a catch, they said. Anna really did well. I wanted to be happy for her. I truly did. Despite everything, she was family, and for a while, she seemed genuinely in love. Then, 2 months before the wedding, everything shifted. It started with a comment from Brandon's mother, something about certain people causing unnecessary tension, people who asked questions, people who didn't know when to stay quiet. Apparently, that person was me. I'd questioned Anna before, not cruelly, not publicly, just honestly. About money, about responsibility, about the way she spoke to our younger cousin Lucy at Christmas, mocking her thrift store dress like kindness was optional. Somehow that made me a problem. Instead of defending me, my aunt and uncle decided it was easier to quietly remove me from the guest list. They called it avoiding drama. My parents, my own parents, suggested I accept it. For the sake of family harmony, they said. The betrayal stung, but what truly shattered something inside me was what came next. They still expected me to help pay. At a family barbecue, my aunt cornered me near the grill and asked for $2,000, money I'd been saving for a vacation I'd planned for over a year. When I told her I wouldn't pay for a wedding I wasn't invited to, she called me selfish. This is about family, Alina. I crossed my arms. So is the invitation. She waved it off. That's different. No, it wasn't. That night I booked my trip. Montana, Wyoming, the exact week of the wedding. And for the first time in years, I chose myself. I left for Montana the morning before Anna's wedding. Not dramatically. No farewell posts. No passive-aggressive captions. Just a single suitcase, my hiking boots, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I wasn't abandoning anything worth staying for. At the airport, my phone buzzed nonstop. My mother called twice before security. My father texted once, "We need to talk before you go." I didn't respond. The plane lifted off, and with it, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for months finally loosened. Montana greeted me with space. Real space. Endless sky, sharp mountain silhouettes, air so clean it felt like it reset my lungs. I rented a small car and drove north toward Whitefish, watching civilization thin out mile by mile. No billboards, no reminders, no expectations. I checked into a modest cabin tucked between tall pines, the kind of place where the silence isn't empty. It's full. Birds, wind, the crunch of gravel under boots. That first night, I slept like someone who hadn't been bracing for impact all her life. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and drove to Glacier National Park. The sky was still bruised purple when I reached Lake McDonald. I stood at the edge of the water, watching the mountains reflect perfectly on the surface, and felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Peace. No one needed anything from me here. No one was disappointed in me. No one expected me to fix what I didn't break. I sent one message that day, to Ethan, my boyfriend. We'd been dating a few months, long enough for him to know my family history, short enough that he didn't feel entitled to interfere. He'd supported my decision to travel without hesitation. "You made the right call," he'd said the night before I left. "Go breathe." I sent him a photo of the lake. He replied almost immediately, "You look lighter already." And he was right. The days fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings hiking trails with names like Hidden Lake and Avalanche Creek. Afternoons wandering small towns, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been brewed by someone who cared. Evenings cooking simple meals in the cabin, windows open, letting the mountain air roll through. I turned off most notifications, left the family group chat muted. If something truly urgent happened, they knew how to reach me. On my second day, I tried fly fishing in a narrow mountain stream. I didn't catch a single thing, but standing knee-deep in cold water, listening to nothing but the current, felt like therapy I didn't know I needed. On the third day, I went whitewater rafting on the Flathead River. The guide, a sunburned guy named Jake, who'd fled California years ago, told stories about tourists who ignored warning signs and thought wildlife was a prop for social media. "Nature doesn't care about your plans," he said, laughing as we hit a stretch of rapids. "That's the lesson." I smiled, gripping the paddle. Neither does family, apparently. That night, I stayed at a small bed and breakfast run by a couple who'd moved from Chicago decades ago. They served chicken and waffles that tasted like comfort, and their golden retriever, Scout, followed me everywhere like we'd known each other for years. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt genuinely happy. Back home, Anna was getting married. I didn't think about it much at first. When I did, it felt distant, abstract, like a movie I wasn't watching. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early and drove toward Many Glacier. The trail was quiet. Fog clung to the valleys. Somewhere in the distance, elk moved through tall grass. I imagined Anna getting her makeup done, my aunt hovering, my mother fussing over details, Brandon adjusting his cufflinks, flashing that easy smile everyone loved. I wondered briefly if they noticed my absence. Then my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. I ignored it and kept walking. By midday, I was sitting at a small cafe in Bozeman, sipping a cappuccino by the window. Outside, the river moved lazily, sunlight breaking across the surface. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could be so calm when, somewhere else, a celebration was unfolding without me. Then my phone exploded. Missed call, text message, another call. I frowned, pulled it closer, and saw the sender. Danny, Anna's brother. The message was 3 words. "The wedding is ruined." My stomach dropped. The cafe noise faded. The chatter, the clinking cups, even the river outside seemed to blur as I scrolled. Voicemail from my mother. Text from my aunt. Unknown number calling twice in a row. My perfectly crafted cappuccino suddenly tasted bitter. I opened another message. "Call me, now." I set the cup down, hands unsteady. Something had gone very, very wrong. As I sat there, surrounded by strangers who had no idea who I was or what my family was unraveling back east, I felt the first crack in the illusion of distance. The reminder that blood has a way of stretching across state lines. I hadn't even been there. And somehow, the disaster had still found me. I stared at the phone, my reflection faint in the screen, and felt the weight of an old pattern trying to pull me back in. The role I'd always played. The fixer. The one expected to absorb the fallout quietly. Outside, the river kept moving. Inside, my heart raced. I hadn't answered yet, but I already knew this wasn't going to be simple. The calm I'd found in the mountains felt fragile now, like glass waiting for a stone, and I had the sudden, sinking realization that the worst of the story hadn't happened yet. Not even close. I didn't call back right away. I sat there in that cafe for a long moment, phone face down on the table, listening to the hum of conversations around me. A couple laughed near the counter. Someone complained about the weather. Normal life continued, oblivious. Finally, I picked up. My mother answered on the first ring. Her voice was strained, tight, breathless, like she'd been crying and yelling in equal measure. She started talking before I could say hello, words tumbling over each other, fragments stitched together by panic. "It's a mess, Alina. Everything is a mess. You need to come home." I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the river outside the window. "What happened?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Whatever this was, it was worse than they wanted to admit. "It's Brandon," she said finally. He's been lying." That was the opening crack. The rest poured out in pieces. interrupted by sniffles, background voices, someone shouting my name like invoking it might fix things. 3 days before the wedding, Brandon had emptied their honeymoon fund, $15,000, at a casino. Gone in one night. Slot machines, blackjack, something about chasing losses. No one knew he gambled, or so they claimed. But that wasn't the worst part. He hadn't been working. Not really. 6 months earlier, he'd been fired from his finance job. He'd still left the house every morning in a suit, still complained about traffic, still talked about office politics. All of it a performance. Credit cards maxed out to keep the illusion alive. The truth surfaced during the rehearsal dinner. A man showed up, someone from his old firm, demanding company property back, a laptop, software licenses. He confronted Brandon in front of both families, right there in the country club's polished dining room, under chandeliers that cost more than my annual rent. Anna found out in public, in her rehearsal dress, in front of everyone. My mother paused there, breath hitching. She still went through with it, she said. She thought they could fix it. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. The wedding happened anyway. Vows were exchanged, smiles plastered on, applause echoing through a room full of people who didn't yet know they were sitting on a fault line. Then, during the reception, the ground gave way. 2 men in suits arrived while guests were eating dinner. They weren't loud. They weren't threatening. That somehow made it worse. They pulled Anna and Brandon aside, legal papers in hand, and explained, calmly, that Brandon owed a significant amount of money. Not just to the casino, to private lenders. $35,000. And now that they were married, the debt was Anna's problem too. I imagined it. Forks frozen midair, whispers spreading table to table, the 5-tier wedding cake untouched, leaning slightly under its own unnecessary grandeur. The reception stopped being a celebration and turned into a spectacle. And still it got worse. Brandon had forged Anna's signature on a loan, used her parents' house as collateral. $20,000 borrowed without anyone knowing. The payment was already overdue. My aunt's house, the one she'd lived in for 25 years, the one she'd bragged about hosting holidays in, suddenly at risk because of a man she'd praised as perfect. By the time my mother finished talking, my coffee had gone cold. My phone buzzed again. Another call, then another. My aunt, my uncle, my father. I ended the call with my mother and just stared at the screen. Back in Westchester, the wedding reception had turned into a crisis meeting. Guests left early, murmuring excuses. Others stayed, eyes glued to the unfolding disaster like it was reality television. Anna was crying, makeup streaked, dress heavy with expectation and regret. My aunt was hysterical, my uncle furious. Brandon kept apologizing, promising he could fix everything. I was hundreds of miles away, sitting by a river, watching my family implode. And then they started calling me. My mother again, this time softer, asking carefully if I could come home early, if I could help them think through options. My aunt called next, sobbing openly. She asked if I could loan them the $2,000 they'd demanded before, and maybe more, just temporarily, until they sorted things out. The irony pressed against my chest like a weight. My uncle took a different approach. He spoke calmly, logically, like this was a business negotiation. Reminded me how I was good with money, how they were family, how this was bigger than hurt feelings. Then my father. He sighed a lot, told me I was being stubborn, that sometimes adults had to rise above personal slights for the greater good. I stepped outside the cafe while he talked, letting the mountain air hit my face. Why should I give up my vacation, I asked him, to fix a problem created by a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice carried that familiar edge of disappointment. You're making this about yourself. I hung up before he could finish. Later that afternoon, while hiking alone through the foothills, my phone rang again. This time it was Anna. I almost didn't answer. Her voice was raw when I picked up, stripped of arrogance, stripped of certainty. I know I don't deserve this, she said immediately. I know excluding you was wrong. I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. I stopped walking. I need your help, Alina, she continued, crying openly now. I don't know what to do. Everyone keeps yelling. They're saying we could lose the house. You're the only one who might be able to help. For a moment, I said nothing. I thought about Christmas dinners, about the comments she'd made about my job, about the silence when I was uninvited, about being expected to pay anyway. I'm sorry this is happening to you, I said finally, but I can't fix this. She sobbed harder, apologized again, promised things would be different. But the damage had already been done. That evening, back at my cabin, Scout curled at my feet. I watched the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky burned orange, then softened to blue. I called my mother one last time. I told her I wouldn't come home early, that I wouldn't contribute money, that I hoped things worked out, but that I was done being responsible for disasters I didn't create. The explosion was immediate. Heartless, selfish, vindictive. Texts flooded in. Calls went unanswered. Then my uncle called again. This time he didn't ask. He blamed me. If I'd just paid earlier, he said, if I hadn't been so difficult, maybe they wouldn't have relied on Brandon. Maybe they would have seen the signs sooner. That was the moment something finally broke cleanly inside me. This wasn't about money. It was about control. And I was done handing mine over. That night I didn't cry. I thought I would. Years ago, I would have. I would have lain awake, replaying every accusation, wondering if I really was selfish, if I really should have done more. But as the cabin settled into silence and the mountains darkened outside my window, all I felt was an unfamiliar stillness. Relief. Scout shifted at my feet, letting out a low, contented sigh. I scratched behind his ears absently and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the trees. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for the next demand. The next morning, my phone was full again. Messages from my aunt accusing me of abandoning the family in their darkest hour. A long text from my cousin Danny telling me he was disappointed and that he never expected this from me. Missed calls from unknown numbers, probably creditors or relatives passing phones around like I was a last resort. I read them all. Then I turned the phone face down and went outside. The rest of my vacation unfolded exactly as planned. I learned to cast properly while fly fishing, finally feeling the rhythm of the line instead of fighting it. I hiked deeper into Yellowstone's backcountry, where the trails narrowed and the noise in my head faded completely. I ate at roadside diners with names like Cowboy Cafe and Mountain High Pie, where no one knew me, no one cared who my cousin was, and no one expected me to sacrifice myself for their comfort. Ethan called every night. He didn't push, didn't tell me what I should do. He just listened. Sometimes we talked about the places I'd seen, sometimes about nothing at all. "You sound different," he said one evening. "How?" "Lighter," he replied. "Like you finally stopped apologizing for existing." When I drove south into Wyoming near the end of the trip, the Grand Tetons rose ahead of me like something unreal. I pulled over at a scenic overlook and stood there alone, wind tugging at my jacket, staring at a horizon that felt endless. That's when it fully settled in. I wasn't running away. I was choosing not to run back. Back home, the fallout dragged on for weeks. The wedding photos were never posted. Vendors demanded payments. Lawyers got involved. My aunt and uncle barely avoided losing their house by taking out a second mortgage that would tie them to that debt for the next 15 years. Anna got the marriage annulled within months. She moved to Portland, started working at a nonprofit, downsized her life dramatically. We exchanged a few brief messages. Not apologies anymore, just quiet acknowledgments of reality. We weren't close. We probably never would be. But the illusion was gone, and strangely, that made things easier. Family gatherings changed. There was an invisible line now. People chose sides without ever saying it out loud. Conversations stayed shallow. Certain topics were avoided entirely. I was no longer the dependable fallback, the silent contributor. And yes, some of them still thought I was wrong. But something unexpected happened. I stopped caring. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like it had before. I used the money I'd saved, money that would have disappeared into someone else's mess, to take 2 more trips, one to Alaska, one through the Pacific Northwest. I hiked, kayaked, learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. My relationship with Ethan deepened naturally, without pressure. He never asked me to choose between him and my family. He never expected me to prove my loyalty through sacrifice. And for the first time, I understood what that kind of respect felt like. The strangest part wasn't watching my family struggle. It was realizing how much better I felt without the constant weight of their expectations pressing on my chest. They wanted me gone when things were good, so I stayed gone when things fell apart. And that, not revenge, not anger, was what finally freed me. Every time I look back at the photos from Montana, the mountains, the rivers, the quiet mornings where nothing was demanded of me, I'm reminded of something important. Sometimes the most powerful response to being excluded is to stop trying to earn your way back in.